Love can bring happiness, but sometimes it demands too much, to the point where we forget our own worth. In the effort to please someone else, we slowly change, accepting things that don't truly align with who we are, just to keep a relationship going. But at some point, we look back and realize, we're no longer ourselves. Today's story is about Robert, a man who once believed that love would bring him happiness, only to find himself losing his identity in the process. He faced a crucial choice: continue in a relationship that diminished him or reclaim the person he once was. In the end, Robert made a bold decision, to let go of a love that no longer served him and rediscover his true self. His journey is a reminder that love should never come at the cost of our own identity. True happiness begins when we choose ourselves. At 70, Robert had lived nearly a full life, one defined by responsibility, sacrifice, and deep-rooted family values. He had been a devoted husband, a loving father, and a hardworking man. For decades, his world revolved around providing for his family, ensuring his wife and children had a good life. To him, happiness was found in the simple moments: peaceful family dinners, the laughter of his loved ones, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing they were safe and happy. But as time passed, the very things that had once been his greatest joy slowly became an aching void. His wife passed away, leaving behind an emptiness that no words could fill. The woman who had walked beside him through life's ups and downs was suddenly gone. The small rituals they once shared, morning cups of coffee, evening conversations, became mere memories. Losing her felt like losing a part of himself. Then, as life naturally unfolded, his children grew up, built families of their own, and moved away. He didn't blame them; he had raised them to be independent, to create lives beyond the home they had once shared. But understanding that didn't make the silence any less deafening. The house, once filled with laughter and conversation, now stood still and quiet. The dinner table, once crowded with stories of the day, now felt too large for just one person. Mornings began in solitude, with nothing but the ticking clock to accompany him. Evenings ended the same way, with loneliness pressing in like an unshakable weight. No matter how much he tried to stick to his daily routines, Robert couldn't ignore the growing sense of isolation creeping into his life. He realized that what he longed for wasn't just companionship; he craved something deeper, something real. Robert didn't want to simply be a father, a grandfather, or an aging man defined by his past. He wanted to be seen, appreciated, and valued as a whole person. Society often links love with youth, but the heart doesn't age. Robert believed that at any stage of life, everyone deserves to love and be loved in return. It wasn't youthful romance that he sought, but rather, a connection, a relationship where two people could share stories, walk side by side, and find meaning in the days they had left. He wanted someone to listen to him, to stroll with him through the park in the late afternoon, to enjoy life's quiet but meaningful moments together. More than anything, he wanted to be with someone who made him feel like himself, not just an aging man in need of care, but a person with thoughts, dreams, and emotions that still mattered. And then, he met Angela. With her energy, charm, and zest for life, Angela made Robert feel as though a new door had opened for him. She reminded him that life still had surprises left, that love and joy weren't reserved for the young. At first, it felt like a second chance at happiness, a gift he never expected. But what Robert didn't know was that this relationship would challenge him in ways he had never faced before. It would lead him through the highs of love and connection, but also force him to confront the deepest question of all: what happens when love demands more than you can give without losing yourself? On a late autumn afternoon, as the golden sunlight faded over the quiet streets, Robert stepped into a familiar cafe. He never used to go out for coffee alone, but that day, something inside him craved change. As he ordered an espresso, his gaze casually drifted across the room and landed on a woman sitting near the corner, laughing warmly with the barista. She had eyes that sparkled with life, a radiant smile, and a presence that seemed to draw people in effortlessly. The way she laughed, it was as if she could brighten an entire room. Something stirred inside Robert, a feeling he hadn't recognized in years. By chance, they ended up sitting near each other, and before he knew it, a conversation had begun. Her name was Angela. She was a woman who loved art, adored literature, and carried an unshakable passion for life. She spoke about paintings that inspired her, journeys that had shaped her, and how she found beauty in the smallest, most ordinary moments. Robert listened intently, not just because her words were intriguing, but because, for the first time in a long while, he felt truly alive rather than just existing. After that day, they started seeing each other more often. Angela pulled Robert into a world that was far more vibrant than the quiet, routine-driven life he had grown accustomed to. No longer did he sit by his window, simply watching time slip by. Instead, he found himself living again. One afternoon, Angela invited him to a local art gallery. At first, Robert hesitated. How long had it been since he cared about things like this? But as he stood before a canvas bursting with color, listening to Angela passionately describe each brushstroke, he realized how much he had missed the beauty of the world around him. Life isn't just about getting through the days, Angela said with a playful smile. We can still find joy, no matter how old we are. And Robert began to believe it. He tried foods he had never considered before, attended small community events with Angela, and even, on one particularly lively evening, found himself on a dance floor. Age is just a number, Angela teased, reaching for his hand. The real question is, are you willing to try? At first, Robert felt awkward, self-conscious. But then, surrounded by Angela's laughter and energy, he took a step outside his comfort zone. His transformation wasn't just about experiences, it was also about how he saw himself. One afternoon, Angela gave him a mischievous look and said, "Robert, have you ever thought about updating your wardrobe? A little change might make you feel brand new." He chuckled, brushing off the idea at first. But standing in front of a mirror in a clothing store, he realized just how long it had been since he had truly cared about his appearance. He chose a deep blue button-down instead of his usual muted tones and tried on a jacket he once thought was too youthful. For the first time in years, he looked at his reflection and saw someone different, a man who still had life left in him, a man who was rediscovering himself in ways he never thought possible. With Angela by his side, Robert felt a sense of renewal, as if he had been given a second chance at life. He was no longer just going through the motions, he was embracing each moment. The endless conversations, the afternoon walks through the park, the shared sunsets, these things reminded him that happiness was still within reach, no matter his age. Watching Angela's zest for life, Robert realized how long he had allowed himself to be consumed by the past and loneliness. The world was still out there, waiting for him to embrace it. But what Robert didn't know was that this newfound happiness would not last forever. What had once felt like revival would slowly turn into constraint. And soon, he would be forced to confront a difficult question. Was this truly love, or just an illusion that led him further away from himself? In the early days with Angela, Robert felt as though he had found a renewed sense of life. She encouraged him to try new things, reinvent himself, and embrace life in ways he had never considered before. Everything seemed brighter, and Robert believed he was changing for the better. But over time, those seemingly harmless changes began to take on a different form. At first, it was just small suggestions. One afternoon, as they were walking together, Angela smiled and said, "Robert, that coat is getting old. Why not try something a little more modern?" Robert glanced down at his familiar coat, one he had worn for years and felt comfortable in. He had never thought of it as outdated, but under Angela's expectant gaze, he simply smiled and nodded. Another time, during dinner, Angela tilted her head, studying him before teasingly saying, "Have you ever thought about trying a different hairstyle? A little change could make you look fresher." At first, Robert brushed it off. He believed Angela's suggestions came from a place of care. But gradually, they stopped feeling like simple advice and became more like expectations, subtle but firm, something Robert felt he needed to meet. One evening, he put on his favorite sweater before heading out, only to have Angela wrinkle her nose and say, "Robert, you're still wearing that? It makes you look older than you actually are." The words weren't harsh, but they made him pause. Once, Angela had told him she admired his composed nature, his quiet confidence. But now, it seemed as though she no longer looked at him the same way. As time passed, her comments became more frequent. She remarked on how he spoke, the stories he shared, even the foods he enjoyed. "Robert, men your age should be more mindful of their health. Maybe cut back on the sweets. You should start reading newer books. Stop telling those old stories all the time. Try walking with a little more confidence. Pay attention to how you carry yourself." At first, Robert tried to take it in stride. He reassured himself that Angela just wanted the best for him. But deep down, he began to feel like he was changing, not because he wanted to, but because he didn't want to disappoint her. One evening, at a small gathering, Robert was engaged in conversation when Angela pulled him aside. Lowering her voice, she said, "Can you try to be a little more engaging when you talk? You always sound so serious." Robert looked at her, confusion flickering in his eyes. She had once told him she admired his thoughtful nature, the way he spoke with depth. But now, it seemed she wanted him to be someone else entirely. Her disappointment became harder to ignore. If he didn't follow her suggestions, she would sigh, shrug, or shake her head in quiet frustration. Over time, Robert found himself constantly striving to meet her expectations that seemed to shift with every passing day. One afternoon, standing in front of the mirror, he asked himself, "Am I really changing for the better, or am I just becoming the man Angela wants me to be?" But he didn't dare think beyond that. Because more than anything, he was afraid of losing the happiness he had worked so hard to hold on to. Robert had changed. His friends had noticed it long ago. The once self-assured, composed man they knew had become hesitant, always second-guessing his words, his clothes, even his actions. Martin, his lifelong friend, had brought it up more than once. "You're not yourself anymore, Robert. You never used to care so much about what others thought." But Robert would only offer a small, dismissive smile. He convinced himself that relationships required adjustments, that love meant compromising to make things work. Angela only wanted what was best for him, didn't she? He told himself everything was fine. But then, one day, the truth became impossible to ignore. That evening, Robert and Angela attended a small gathering with her friends. He made sure to dress well, to engage in conversations the way he knew Angela would approve of. He tried his best to fit in, to be the man she wanted him to be. But no matter how much effort he put in, it never seemed to be enough. As the group laughed and shared stories, Robert decided to recount a memory from his younger days. He thought it was a light-hearted, enjoyable tale, one that would bring a smile to their faces. But before anyone could react, Angela let out a small laugh and shook her head. "Robert, you always tell the same old stories. Why not talk about something more interesting?" The words were soft, almost playful. But they cut deeper than anything she had ever said. There was a brief, awkward pause before the others chuckled politely and moved on. But Robert felt as if a curtain had suddenly been pulled away, revealing something he had refused to see. For the first time, he realized how small he had become. A story that once brought him joy now felt out of place, unwelcome. He forced a smile, but inside, a hollow emptiness spread through him. He had changed so much. And for what? Angela didn't look at him with love, she looked at him with disappointment, irritation, even indifference. No one else in the room noticed what had just unfolded within Robert. But as the evening wore on, he knew, without a doubt, that something inside him had shifted. By the time they returned home, Robert walked into the bathroom, turned on the light and stared at himself in the mirror. Who was this man? The face staring back at him was tired, the eyes uncertain, the posture hesitant. Was this the same man who had once lived life on his own terms? The man who had been confident in who he was, who had made his own choices without seeking approval? Or was this someone who had slowly reshaped himself, piece by piece, just to satisfy someone who never seemed fully satisfied? At that moment, Robert could no longer deny the truth. How long had he been changing to meet Angela's expectations? How many times had he silenced himself, abandoned his interests, reshaped his routines, all in fear of displeasing her? And the most important question, was he happy? The answer came faster than he expected. No. Robert sat down, rubbing his hands over his face. He had once believed love would bring joy back into his life, that Angela was the light that would fill the empty spaces in his heart. But now, that light only cast a shadow over him, making him fade into the background of his own existence. Was love supposed to require this much sacrifice? Was love supposed to make someone feel like they were never quite good enough? Robert closed his eyes and took a deep breath. It was time to make a decision. Robert sat quietly by the window, watching the golden hues of the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the familiar streets. His cup of tea rested on the table, steam curling into the air, but he made no move to drink it. Inside, he felt a strange emptiness, one he couldn't quite explain or figure out how to fill. For days, his thoughts had been consumed by reflection, about himself, about his relationship with Angela, and about the man he had become. He recalled those moments when he stood before the mirror, struggling to recognize his own reflection. He thought about all the seemingly harmless suggestions that had slowly become suffocating expectations. And, most vividly, he remembered the sting of Angela's casual dismissal of him in front of others, as if his presence had never really mattered. For the first time in years, Robert asked himself, is this really love? The next morning, Robert picked up the phone and called Angela. Her voice was the same as always, confident, poised, carrying a subtle air of authority. "You're calling early. Is something wrong?" Angela asked. "I'd like to see you," Robert replied, feeling his heartbeat slow but steady. They met at the small cafe where they had shared their first dates. When Angela walked in, she still carried herself with the same elegance, but this time, Robert saw her differently. She slid into the seat across from him and smiled slightly. "You look serious today." Robert took a deep breath. "Angela, I've been thinking a lot about us." She tilted her head, her eyes sharp with curiosity. "And what have you realized?" "That I've lost myself." She blinked, momentarily surprised, but then let out a quiet chuckle. "Robert, what are you talking about? I've only ever wanted the best for you." "No, Angela," he said gently, cutting through her words. "You wanted the best for a version of me that you created, not the person I truly am." A silence settled between them, thick and unyielding. Angela set down her coffee, folding her arms. "So, what are you saying?" Robert met her gaze, his voice calm but resolute. "I'm choosing myself." Angela raised an eyebrow. "You're breaking up with me?" He nodded. "Not because I don't care for you, but because I finally understand that love shouldn't require someone to lose their sense of self. I can't keep changing just to meet your expectations, and I won't live a life where I no longer recognize the man I see in the mirror." Angela exhaled slowly, shaking her head. "You've changed, Robert." Robert smiled softly. "No, I'm just finding my way back to who I was." He stood up, carefully placing a few bills on the table before looking at her one last time. "I wish you happiness, Angela." And with that, he walked away. As he stepped outside, the crisp autumn air filled his lungs. For the first time in a long while, Robert felt light. The sadness was still there, but it no longer weighed him down. It wasn't regret, it was the pain of growth, the ache that came with closing one chapter to begin another. In the days that followed, Robert slowly reclaimed the life he had set aside. He returned to the things he once loved but had abandoned over time. One morning, he unlocked the small room in his house that had remained untouched for years, a space filled with unfinished paintings and dust-covered brushes. Angela had once dismissed his love for painting as a waste of time, urging him to focus on more practical things. But now, there was no one to tell him what he should or shouldn't do. Robert sat down, picked up a brush, and began to paint. For the first time in years, he wasn't creating to impress anyone or to seek approval, he was painting for himself. Stroke by stroke, color by color, he felt something inside him reignite. Beyond rekindling old passions, Robert also reconnected with the people who had always been there for him. One morning, he picked up his phone and dialed a familiar number. When Martin answered, his voice was filled with surprise. Well. Took you long enough to call me." Robert chuckled. "How about a coffee?" Martin laughed. "You name the time." When they met, Robert felt a warmth that he hadn't felt in years, a sense of belonging without pressure, a friendship that never demanded he change or be someone he wasn't. The simple joys returned, the quiet mornings spent sipping coffee, the peaceful evenings spent lost in his art, the ease of conversation with friends who accepted him for exactly who he was. And then, he realized something profound. Loneliness wasn't just about being alone. True loneliness was losing touch with oneself. Now, Robert had found himself again. And he understood something he had overlooked for too long: the most important love is the love you have for yourself. One late afternoon, Robert sat on a park bench, watching the sun sink beyond the horizon. A slow, genuine smile spread across his face. Not a forced smile, not one meant to please anyone, but a quiet expression of peace and contentment. Because now, he no longer needed to seek validation. For the first time in years, Robert was living for himself. Robert never imagined he would face the decision to leave a relationship at 70. He had once believed that love could fill the emptiness inside him, that Angela was the person who would bring him joy and new meaning in life. But as time passed, he realized that this love wasn't helping him become the best version of himself. If anything, it was making him lose the man he once took pride in being. Looking back on his journey, Robert came to understand an important truth: self-worth is not negotiable. He had changed the way he dressed, the way he spoke, and even the way he thought, all to please Angela. But no matter how much he tried, she always found something about him that wasn't enough. And that was when he realized, true love never makes you feel inadequate. For a long time, Robert feared that if he walked away, he would lose his last chance at experiencing love. But then, he understood that it's never too late to change and reclaim happiness. Leaving an unfulfilling relationship wasn't a failure, it was an act of courage, a choice to live in alignment with who he truly was. And most importantly, Robert learned that the greatest love a person can have is not the love from someone else, but the love they have for themselves. When he started valuing himself, doing what he loved without needing anyone's approval, he realized that happiness had always been within reach, he had simply forgotten how to see it. That evening, as he sat on his usual park bench, watching the sun slowly set behind the trees, Robert smiled. It wasn't the smile of a man who had just lost love, it was the smile of a man who had finally found himself again. Robert's story isn't just about finding love, it's about finding himself. He once believed that changing for someone else was the key to happiness. But over time, he realized that true love should never come at the cost of losing oneself. When his relationship made him question his own worth, he had the courage to walk away. In doing so, he discovered that happiness doesn't come from having someone by your side, it comes from learning to value yourself. If you've ever changed who you are just to hold on to someone, ask yourself, is this relationship truly making me happy? If the answer is no, maybe it's time to put yourself first. You deserve a love that embraces you for who you truly are, not for a version someone else wants you to be. What do you think of Robert's story? Share your thoughts in the comments. If this message resonated with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, to help spread the message of love, self-worth, and courage.